My dear friends, it's great to see you. In case this is our first meeting, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And in this fourth installment of Ernest Gary Gygax Jr.'s Oral History series, we're doing both, because we're talking to an interesting person who had a dramatic impact on the creation of the role-playing game industry. And in this episode, I'm confident many of you have been waiting for this, we get into the gaming itself, because Ernie's going to tell us about the first games that his dad Gary designed. Now, they start as board games, but then some of those little exciting pamphlets that became a big deal, they show up. And he also gives us some of the less savory details about his father's activities and predilections, which as a historian, which that's what this series is for, to record the oral history of Ernie Gygax, I want the facts. Good, bad, indifferent, I need the facts. We need the facts. History needs the facts, because we can only learn from those who came before us if we know what they did, because then we can measure how did that come out. Did it all end in tears and disaster? Did it work out well? If we're ever to not repeat one damn mistake from the past, we have to know what happened. We have to know the truth. And so whether these events make you think ill or fair of Gary or Ernie, the facts are there for you to assess. And we get a fist fight in Florida between Gary and Ernie. I'm telling you, this episode's got it all, man. So buckle up. It gets a little spicy and a little exciting on this roller coaster of Ernie Gygax's life. And I'll see you on the other side.
At about 6 or 7 years old, well, no, it'd be my sister Heidi's only 5 years younger. But my dad took us still from the Brown house to Chicago on a Saturday to work at the Fireman's Fund Insurance Company, because he was an underwriter and he had a bunch of work. But he also was working with this real cute 18-year-old secretary that was obvious, had eyes on him, and he returned the favor. And Mom was very pregnant with Heidi. So he dressed Elisa and I up. She had like a little beautiful dress, and I had a little suit. But as I was almost at the building, there was a bigger curb than I was used to, and my toe stubbled, and I went into the puddle. So then suddenly it's, but when we got there, the girl helped me to the restroom and cleaned me up and all this. And then a little later on, she got us ice cream. And I really don't know if there was a lot of work going on or not. I think there was some discussions. So at that point, Dad was considering leaving his family for a youngster. And his mother said, if you leave her, that's okay. But don't you dare leave her pregnant, and never leave her while she can't take care of the children. She said, you have to be responsible. So you either got to make this work or not, but you're not leaving now until she's had the baby, and you guys are going to figure this out.
So this situation was serious enough to where, like, even Mom knew about it and would weigh in on it.
Yeah.
Gary's mom.
Yes, Posey.
Yeesh.
And well, Dad was probably talking to her because she was the only thing he had left. And he was obviously attracted. And Mom was gorgeous, but maybe the children and being focused on the children and all that was too much. But that was at the tail end of his Fireman's Fund. But happily, I can say that they worked that out, because Dad and Mom both were, what will we call it, lead elements, or A quality, meaning that they both wanted to be in charge.
Gotcha. So do you know if it was just that your dad was more enticed by this young thing? Because I mean, that's what young things do, they entice. Or were there personality conflicts with your mom? Just a horn dog in general? What was his motivation there?
The Brown house, so I don't remember a lot of issues there. More at 330 Center Street when things would get a little more exciting. Obviously, Mom and Dad bickered, but it wasn't something that a young boy of 5 would remember.
Okay.
There wasn't any blood or any horrible stuff like that. But there was, again, they were both passionate people, and Mom wouldn't just be pushed down. She was intelligent and beautiful and all this sort of thing, and a mother. So she wasn't going to just go, yes, dear, I'll do whatever you say. But she did, she tried lots of stuff to try to keep him. After that incident, she took some pictures, which are in my pictures of my mother. And she gave him 4 pictures that were a little suggestive, not crazy, nothing like I would think of as, but still, Mom in a mini skirt she only wore for that one shot with, her against the dad's den door, which I think is fine. But she's like, oh, that was so horrible. You might get, if it was close to seeing panties or something like that. So Mom was thinking that was, and
so
this
were
kind of
tastefully alluring without being lewd.
Yes. And basically she's trying to give him something to look at when he starts having any doubts about what's at home. So that
Yeah.
was an interesting move on her part,
Okay.
yeah, because she was fighting. And dad, I don't know if he wasn't necessarily as handsome as she was attractive, but he was a smart man who was doing his job well and was in contention to be hired as a next level boss when this gentleman was leaving. But it wasn't much longer than that when Luke, I don't know if Luke had been born yet. I don't think so. I think it was, no, I'm sure no. Luke was in the hopper, as we'd say. And at that time, my dad lost his job at Fireman's Fund because he had aggressively, and so there was two gentlemen vying for the spot. And in the nutshell, my dad lost. So that dude, as soon as that happened, came up to my dad and says, I'm laying you off indefinitely, whatever, you're gone. Clean out your stuff. And so dad ended up going from a guy who was in a suit all the time in Chicago. Oh, what do we call that? It's the most the loop, maybe. I'm trying to think the real downtown section of Chicago where he was in there, and suddenly being home and needing to find work because he went on unemployment, which wasn't much, and we got food stamps. But even food stamps in those days, I remember we got our food budget at that time with 4.5 of us, and the parents was $55. Now, of course, that's 1969, $70. Way different than in moderns. But yes, we had to have like horrible margarine, and mom would keep on buying powdered milk and trying to put it in regular milk containers to fool us and make it cold. And I was always a little snitch that was like, it's powdered milk. And as soon as I did that, the other kids wouldn't have any either. And it's like, oh, how are we going to survive? That kind of
That's
thing.
terrible.
But what was good is that when they got on food stamps with our family size, they said, oh, you guys, this family needs $130 worth of food stamps. So what they did is in those days, they made my folks spend that $55 to get $130 worth of paper food stamps. And they even had, I think at that time, they might have even had coin food stamps, but they got rid of that at some time. It was like, no, no, no. So dad suddenly went from feeling, studly and powerful and all this to suddenly he's not doing so well. So that's when he was always into games, and he would mostly play online game, not online. Okay. Letter writing games where they would go back and forth and occasionally be able to make long distance phone calls, but we didn't really have money for that. So
yeah, that used to be expensive. I remember that.
In a letter, he would say, I'll call you after 11 p.m. or just before midnight. And then it was like 30% of the price. But even then, he couldn't talk for real long. So they tried to get everything done in the letter as possible. But a lot of that was diplomacy and Indianomacy, which I imagine was American First Nation people, as well as the Conanomacy. And I'm trying to think if there was other games they got to play online. I doubt it. Online. I keep on going back to online because it's just so natural now. And I don't even like online gaming, but it's a one thing for those that are out in the boonies and or don't have the charisma or the determination to find other people to hang out with. That still allows them, because everybody was a nerd when I was growing up, and I was just as bad as anybody else. Early on, like I said, Dad had that big picture when it was a Nixon, what was it? It wasn't Kennedy. It was a Nixon, the next one, the presidential
Humphrey?
thing.
Hubert
Yes.
Humphrey?
And during that time, Dad put a big thing in the window, which was Christopher Lee as Fu Manchu, and it said Fu Manchu for president in this giant poster. So here he is. He's letting his hair grow long now because he doesn't have to. And then he goes off. He tried working at a metal spinning company to try to feed the company. And that only lasted one day because when he came home, he was just covered in black and blue bruises from the machines or whatever else beating the crap out of him. So he went from using his head to try to do physical stuff, and it wasn't in his aura or ability set.
Well, back in the day, and especially with as many mouths as he had to feed, you couldn't afford the luxury of sitting around and waiting for something to come along. You had to get while the getting was there. Not even while it was good, but as long as it was there to be had, you had to go for it. I remember these days.
When I was still preteen, well preteen, maybe 7 or 8, Dad created a game or two for Don Lowry at Guidon Games. And it was Dunkirk, and with an interesting spelling, if I remember right, probably the French spelling. And the other game that was Alexander the Great, and it was a single battle, I think the Battle of Issus. And then after that, he was just coming out with, and it was later published by TSR, Little Bighorn. And the Indians didn't automatically win, and it really took a lot into account to see just if Benteen's player, because he split the commands up. The idea was to do that so you'd have multiple players so they could do as really happened. you know, People get a little too bold, and there was no reason to believe, but Custer wanted to be president. See, this is all stuff he was teaching me as from the earliest age. Custer wanted to be president, and so he thought that he needed to do a brave act because he'd been very poor in West Point's school and all this. So here was a chance. He was off fighting what they considered to be second quality troops. So he rushed in there, and he was going to do, as many of them did in those days, that he was going to attack their village and mop up or rout the women and children, and thereby have the warriors forced into battle with him. It did turn out, but it turned out after that all of his men would, as Dad had pointed out, they all had their hands and head and everything and legs cut off, so that when they went to the next existence, they wouldn't be together, so they could never fight and try to kill the First Nation peoples back again in the next life. So they didn't do all those we call atrocious behavior, war crimes, or whatever we want to try to call it now. But it was their belief in another type of world, or at least the groups that were involved in that. And it was interesting that all those different groups that didn't really like each other came together against a common foe. So our military had pushed these guys so hard and done such nasty stuff. Well, the Indians did horrible things to each other, but that was something they understood. And they didn't have mass troop groups, and lots of times it'd be more like hunting parties going out to count coup or get a wife.
Well, that's one of the things that the Amerindians really liked about us showing up with our guns, is that, hold up, in the past I could fight this jackass across the hill to a standstill and I'd lose some men, he'd lose some men, but we couldn't just crush them. But these guys with their boomsticks, they can wipe people out. We should get them to help us. And that did not work out for them either.
The same thing happened with, well, it's even before boomsticks. That's how, I know it's a little off track, but the Zulus, when the first guy that became, it's Cestowayo's grandfather, I think, who the British beat up at the end, Shaka Zulu. Yep. He created the Asenga, which is a stabbing broad-bladed weapon instead of light spears for throwing and taunting it with each other. He also created the buffalo hide shields, the big ones, and all this. So his troops in order would be taught how to do, and they went in as large groups, and instead of maybe taking 5 and 10% casualties and declaring it a day with one guy being the winner and losing some hunting grounds, etc., instead they would wipe out all the men and take the women and children and put them into their own village, keep growing the Zulu people. so boomstick. A change in either technology or tactics and weapons.
People are creative. Yeah. So your dad made that game as well. That's pretty cool.
Well, with Zulu, we played, but it was other people's miniatures. And we did that, I think, the very first time at Jeff Perrin's house. This is just about the time that Jeff had a medieval miniatures set of rules, and there was all kinds of people that had rule sets. You might get 20, 50 people that would like those. And my dad got involved and helped fix it up because he wanted to sell it. Then my dad said, well, what the heck? He added the fantasy supplement, which Jeff Perrin said, oh, you're going to really screw us up here. Said, I want it clear. Now, this has nothing to do with me, that the historical material is my concepts and my ideas, and you just are modifying them. But this fantasy stuff is all yours. Dad didn't keep him to that completely. He prospered a bit, especially when they suggested you buy chainmail with the 3-book box set, and even when it became Greyhawk, Blackmore, Eldritch Wizardry, and then Sword and Spells. Sword and Spells was really the weakest of the products, I think, when it came to, was mass combat. It was more of a Brian Bloom idea. Brian made kind of fun things, but they were overthought and mathematical and not exciting and not quick enough always. But I'm off and away from the home. But I mean, there's just so many wonderful things to be able to say.
I know, right?
It's just, so anyway, Dad and Don Kay, when Dad was no longer working at Fireman's Fund and he was just out of it, they needed a place to play because Donna Kay, Don's wife, didn't want us over there and all that. She does the gaming stuff was to her. So Don had been a childhood friend. And so they got together and they built this incredible large sand table, which is slightly different, but close to what's currently in 330 Center Street. So they did this with all sorts of extra 4x4s and 2x4s because they knew it was going to be super heavy. Then they also used some really heavy plastic, maybe even a couple layers. And then went and got the sand. And at that time, you could go over by the water treatment plant, and there was this whole hill of sand. So we would take a whole bunch of buckets with Don Kay's car because we didn't have wheels as a family.
Did y'all just go steal some people's sand?
It was the city stand, but yeah. And so we were.
We all paid taxes, and so therefore you paid for the sand.
Yeah, well, we paid rent. I think it might have been all of $200 a month then for I guess it's a 3-bedroom, but you had to go through our parents' room at 330 Center Street to get to our rooms.
Oh.
So there was no real privacy. There was a door that they could shut at night, but the bathroom was on the other side of their bedroom. So if they wanted to, any sort of personal energy, that was mostly sending us upstairs to bed, shutting that door and trying to say, don't come downstairs and da-da-da-da-da. So anyway, Don Kay and he made this great sand table, and we were using Airfix miniatures, which we've been using before that just on the dining room table over it. So now we're able to get even more. So our things were like Sherwood Forest, Arab, French legionnaires, Romans, Carthaginians, all the things that Airfix was selling. And then we started getting all these tanks. Roscoe was not the company we started with. I think it was mini tanks. And Dad started getting all these tanks. They're painting them up and getting everything was HO scale, which was 20 millimeter. Okay. Later on, it became 25 for all the lead stuff. And nowadays it's at least 28 to 30 because I guess nobody wants to have the little pipsqueaks next to somebody else's figurines.
Miniature envy. I guess it's a thing.
Size matters, I guess.
It does. It does in a lot of ways.
So I didn't like when they started making 5 millimeter figurines and things. And Brian Bloom went to pins where you would just have pinheads and you'd be able to paint them red for British and this and that. And that was pretty, lackluster. I enjoyed the idea of having at least something to give a representation that you could see of what you were commanding or fighting against. And it had to be something you could see with some definition. It's a still object made of plastic, whatever, with paint on it, but still it represented and allowed you to think of the things you'd seen in the movies and to be able to
to better immerse yourself in what is going on in your head. Yeah.
And shared. Again, and I think I already said, but I think it was at 10 years old, maybe at 8, we went down to Jeff Perrin's and I got to have my first command and we were fighting against the French. So I think there was Prussians, Dad had his Brunswickers, and he had an Oscar Mayer Wiener whistle in the hand of the leader, just, it's like a sausage size. And he would even play that sometimes in the background. And they gave me some, I don't know if they were Russian or Prussian, but I was just the militia. So they gave me an edge and there was a villa. And they also gave me a lead figure on a horse. So at some point I had my 500 men, which was 50 figurines, in that villa, all down below the wall. The wall was probably 4 feet tall. So they're all waiting in the direction where the enemy was. But my morale and our firepower and everything, they stressed on me that I really wasn't up to going face to face with the French, that I should somehow play this coyly or, wait for a proper moment later after they've been bled a bit.
And what did you do?
Well, I got bored, so I ran my leader out over on the other side of the villa a little bit, and there was a bunch of Polish lancers, a group of 400 Polish lancers, 40 figurines. So as I'm going along, suddenly he cuts loose 10 of them to go chase me, 100 men. And so I go, the very next turn, I go jumping over the villa wall, and I'd already given written instructions. And all 500 of my guys stood up just a little bit before the 100 Lancers came. And I think the losses it was going to be 70 to 120. It was a 60 base with a 6-sided die, and then I rolled a 6. So that was the smoke clears and all the Polacks are dead. Then I came out of the villa, and because the French line had advanced, I took them in the side while they were engaged, and we mopped up. And I got best player as a little kid. That was wonderful. Hooray!
So yes, the Polish got taken out, but
it was just wonderful.
Big scheme of things, it was a noble sacrifice for a greater good.
Well, remember, the Polish had been joined with the French. I don't know if it was to start with immediately or if it was when they just saw the inevitable with the French marching along and going towards Russia. But the Polish Lancers were famous and very deadly, front on. So, but that unit had taken 25% casualties. At 50%, most units crack or, start hesitating and all this. So they'd been depleted and weren't as functional or as, mostly they were always held off towards the end for mopping up the opponent, getting them when they're trying to pull away and run away. And that's when you're able to inflict massive casualties rather than charging straight forward into musket fire. So I was being taught Zulu, I was being taught Napoleonics and all this by going down to Rockford, Illinois. And then we'd go to the spot that was ground round, and they used peanuts then. You could get all the peanuts you wanted, and they would have sawdust on a hard floor. So then you would just throw your peanut shells down while you're drinking and eating and all that. And I remember getting my first taste of Drambuie. That's what they were drinking then. And Dad would, just give me a sip of this and that. So that was impressive at that time. There was a hobby shop down there too.
Well, hold on. What did young Ernie think of Drambuie?
It was sweet, so it was tasty.
Oh, okay.
But you needed sugary flavor to taste good. Around that time, like 10 or so, I'd be able to get a beer, but the beer was only a glass of beer with Dad during football only. And then I think it was maybe 8 years old or so, but I just didn't have the stamina to stick for a whole football game. It's crazy because all my buddies would be outside. So I'd watch for a quarter, maybe a half at best. And that was the Bears with Bobby Joe Green as a punter, and some other guy that was a farmer was a receiver, and he could run great routes, but he had hands like boards. The ball would bounce off all the time. So I think we were like 4-10. I remember 3-11 that year that Dad and he'd get all frustrated. So then Mom learned to hate the Bears because when Dad would get in a bad mood, he would become a little less friendly and potentially even hurl things or whatever.
So your dad had a temper, is what
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, yes. He was a bit of a despot. To me, a kindly despot, but still, yes, everything was the way he said. If you didn't agree, much later, Dad, I was maybe 13. And at some point we were bickering. So I was running around the dining room table saying, ha ha, you old man. And he was in his underwear, saying, oh yeah, you look awfully funny or whatever. So finally, when he did catch me, he started pounding on me and knocked me down. But I'm just laughing and making fun, saying, yeah. So then Mom came in there and somehow interposed herself. But I was starting to feel my oats. I was starting to feel like, you can't tell me what to do. And not unheard of. She tried the muscle, you can't beat me. And then later on, that came to affect him at some point, and I could beat him. And I did once, years and years. And when I was like 30 years old. When we were both
like gotten fist fights?
At that time, I was quitting cocaine, but see, that's a whole other. And
wow, that's a whole other story. Yeah.
Yeah. And in a nutshell, he somehow was telling the girl that was with Kelly that maybe, she's right and this and that. And I didn't see it that way. Both of us were suffering, and she was probably talking about going back home. I was living in Tampa, Florida. Somehow with all that, there was too much alcohol. So I started punching the inside of the van windows. And it was a big old Econoline van with all kinds of windows. And he was saying, oh, that's real smart. And I punched every one of them until they were all cracked up. One punch each, just bam, 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 just, full of all this. And he said, well, that's great. So somehow when we got out, he still was chiding me, and I ended up getting him down and pummeling on him more than he could get on me. And then I went upstairs and took a bottle of Everclear, slammed a whole bunch of it, and passed out. And I woke up with a note saying, your dad had trouble walking. We had to, I've thrown your pistol into the pond because, you could hurt yourself or whatever. That was his girlfriend. And your father has just paid for my airline ticket back home. And now you get the van back up to me somehow back in Wisconsin. And I also had a Trans Am that was starting to be expensive. So, but yeah, it was wow. Crazy. That's wow. A little bit of, yes. So I was after to a Chi-Chi's restaurant. We got really plastered on margaritas in 1990, probably. So
did I hear you right? You got plastered on margaritas and then started tearing up the inside of a van and then got in a fist fight with your dad?
Yeah, well, only reason I started punching the windows was he was telling her that she's probably right and you should do what you really think. And I was trying to be dad. I was trying to control my woman
Right.
as I'd been taught. He was interfering.
Yeah, that's a good point. So he was a dictator, as you say. So he
Did he
was
raise?
controlling, he was a disciplinarian, controlling other people in the household, including whatever adult women were there.
Yes, and my sisters are all little dictators, and they generally boss their men around.
Ah,
Still, so I've learned at this late date that I am so much happier when I have a happy woman, and we now discuss anything that we think should be done together, and we make decisions together. And even if it's something at all important and she's not there, I'll call her on the phone, which is not an option in the old days, and discuss things. And not so someone who says, oh, I want to come by Saturday, and I said, let me clear to see if because maybe she would rather do something else on this day.
mhm.
And I've gotten a lot wiser. That's why I'm going to get married.
And if you get the right woman, that head's not just nice to look at, but there's stuff in it too. And they have a lot of good things to say. They have valid opinions. They have better ways to do it than you might have thought of. So yeah, a good woman.
In this case,
gold.
had intelligent women, but they were selfish and intelligent and potentially sneaky and intelligent. So there was no lying in this family. We don't even do omission. I'm blatantly honest in front. I even tell her my war stories and everything and my sexual encounters and all kinds of things. And I've learned some of her stuff, but she's not so open. I'm a blabbermouth. I have no secrets. So, but somehow we've come to not only love each other, but know that whatever we say is the truth. And that is just so important in a relationship, because I've proven many other women to be liars. I should have probably been bailing before I had to get the concrete proof. When you start really feeling that something's wrong, you're probably right.
Yeah, knowing when to cut and get out of there. That's a hard thing to do. And it takes some experience to learn when you need to make that call, but you don't get experience until you've been through enough of the screw ups, and hopefully you learn something out of it. So
yeah, well, as
how
I
long
said,
is it between the two-story Center Street house and Tampa? Like how many years are there between those two things?
I probably left that house at 13 or 14. So the Center Street. And then Tampa, I was 30.
Okay.
30. Long time.
So.
All right. Thank you.
Have a good one, and say hi to Donna. So on my 2024 bingo card, I did not have finding out in an oral history series with Ernie Gygax that he got in a knockdown, drag-out fist fight with his dad in Florida, which is a very Florida thing to do. So cocaine, Everclear, busting up vans, beating up your dad, living in Tampa. Ernie was quite the Florida man. He did it as authentically as you can. But I'm glad to see that he's learned from his past and is now in a much happier trajectory with a wonderful woman. He's gotten his issues under control. One of the things I'm happy about in this series is that every time I interview him, he's looking better and better. So clearly he learned and improved his life based on the mistakes of his past. And for what I've heard from one of Gary's friends, that's a dear friend of ours, Christopher Clark, Gary learned from his mistakes as well. And as he got older, he grew closer to God and hopefully to forgiveness as well. So warts and all, Ernie's giving you the history as he knows it, and I appreciate that. So did you find this episode interesting? I bet you did. If you did, leave a comment. Let me know what it was that most interested you. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and share this around. This is part of the role-playing game hobby's history, and I bet a lot of people would like to know it. My dear friends, that's what I've got. And as we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.